It's very rare for a new mechanic to be discovered in Rocket League, but this week the community was shocked when this clip surfaced on Twitter. Do we have a new Rocket League mechanic? CRL player Jerry has seemingly created a new mechanic, but is it really new? Well, to decide whether we actually have a new mechanic on our hands, we first need to establish what makes a mechanic new. There are 4 main criteria. This includes it needs to be a new mechanic or a new variation of a previous mechanic. It needs to be viable in-game, particularly in comp and the pro scene. It also needs to be popularized by a content creator or pros, but most importantly, the community needs to be able to learn this mechanic as well and use it normally in-game. So is what's being now dubbed as the Jerry Reset fulfill these criteria? Well, we need to go back a little bit. Our story begins on the 12th of October 2020, when a Reddit user by the name of Prawn Stockton posted this clip on Reddit. Alright, let's stop this clip. What do you notice about these 2 clips? Well, we have a very similar use of what looks like wave dashing on the ball. Now, this is not to say that this is the first example of this ever, because wave dashes at this point had just been discovered and people were probably playing around with this before this clip. But this is the earliest example I could find of something that links to our new mechanic. In fact, there are various examples of this being shown later on as well, including Taz or tool assisted superplay, which has gone to the absolute extreme in terms of chaining these resets. However, even though these are similar, this is not the same mechanic. One is extremely rapid, while the other one is a lot more controlled and deliberate. Fast forward into 2021, this clip surfaced from Freestyler and a now Pulse Clan member. Now this looks a lot more like our new mechanic. It's much more controlled and deliberate. And this has been a major argument of freestylers in general. They think that this mechanic is done all the time by freestylers. And they're not necessarily wrong. It's not uncommon to see this kind of reset in a freestyler show match or just in general play. The community has also echoed this statement a little bit, saying that they've got this reset by accident or they see it all the time. So does this mean it's not a new mechanic? Well, not necessarily. Think about something like a squishy save. Do you think that Squishy was the first person to ever do a squishy save? No, I highly doubt it. And if we apply this to this mechanic, Jerry doesn't necessarily seem to be the first person to do this mechanic. But in the case of a squishy save, Squishy was able to prove that it was viable in-game, which comes to our next criteria. Is the Jerry Reset viable within an actual game? Well, this surfaced not long after Jerry posted that. This proved that the Jerry Reset is actually possible within a real game. However, it isn't necessarily the most straightforward mechanic to perform. As you'll notice in this clip, you'll need a lot of space and it requires the defenders not to go up initially. But then you have to think of other mechanics like a Psycho or a Breezy. These require very specific circumstances in order to perform them, and I would argue a Jerry Reset is more realistic than both of those. It's also important to note that this is yet to be performed on the competitive Rocket League scene, so until that happens, there are a couple question marks over to how viable this mechanic is. Going on to our next criteria, it's seemingly learnable as well by both freestylers and normal players who have been able to replicate this multiple times since Jerry posted it. Even Jerry himself has also posted clips of him learning this in training and getting it consistently. So this comes down to our last criteria. Has it been popularized? Well, yes and no. Jerry has brought a huge amount of attention to this, particularly on Twitter, but it's not necessarily a well-known mechanic throughout the entire community. For that to happen, generally a content creator or a pro has to popularize it either through their content or on the pro scene. Jerry has done neither of these things. However, he does have the potential to do this in the future. Being a CRL player himself, he can perform the mechanic in his pro matches, and this would garner a lot of attention. As well as this, hooking up with other content creators or other content creators simply making videos about the mechanic, like me for example, also helps the mechanic become more popular. But enough of all this. Let's get to the point. Is it new or is it not? Well, Let's look back at our criteria. It's not necessarily a new mechanic, although it possibly could be a new variation. It's definitely viable in game and also learnable by the community, and it's somewhat being popularized, but not necessarily yet. So where does this put the Jerry reset? In all honesty, I'm not quite sure. That is honestly up to you and the community. But the one thing I will say on this is that once again, we've been proven that the skill ceiling of Rocket League has definitely not been reached. This is mouldyshoe. Thanks for watching.